What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Wave MTG, a channel dedicated to exploring power levels in EDH and helping you tune your deck to your meta. I'm your host, Jacob, and today we're going to be checking out Go-Shintai of Life's Origin, which is a 4-mana green legendary enchantment creature shrine with white, blue, black, red, green, also known as Wooburg, and tap it. Return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever Go-Shintai of Life's Origin or another non-token shrine enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature token. I had a ton of fun brewing the decks that I have for you today. There's so much that you can do with this commander, so let me know what you did with this commander and where you think it falls on the power level scale. As usual, the deck lists are in the description below, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. So starting off with the Skirmish power level, which is our lowest power level, I shoved every single shrine that I could into this deck. So all the shrines that exist in Magic are in this deck. We got the new ones, the new Go-Shintais. We've got the other shrines in here as well, the Sanctums and the Hondens. So all the shrines are in this deck, and the theme of the deck is to eliminate the legend rule and then copy the shrines. So we have a few like Spark Double, which doesn't eliminate the legend rule entirely, but it can copy either Go-Shintai or one of our other creature shrines that we have here. And then Sakashima actually just eliminates the legend rule for all of our permanents. So we can copy one of our shrines like Go-Shintai, and then we can use some of our others like Clever Imposter to copy the actual regular enchantments and not have to worry about the legend rule making us sacrifice them. We got a few ways to draw cards like Satyr Enchanter, Citizen Champion, very similar to the Estrid deck that I did about a month ago. So if you want to check that out, I'll leave that up here. The instants and sorceries are pretty straightforward. We've got some Ramp, Cultivate, Rampant Growth, Kadama's Reach, some ways to reanimate our enchantments, Dance of the Manse, and the new card, Brilliant Restoration. We've also got Rite of Replication, so we can make a bunch of copies of one of our Go-Shintai. If you do it on our commander, then you're going to get a ton of 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creatures. And we've also got Vanquish the Horde, great board wipe, and an idyllic tutor so we can tutor up some of our shrines. Then our removal package is primarily going to be counterspell based because we want to be able to protect our board. In this deck, we're a very permanent based deck, so being able to stop the board wipes from happening is really key. We've also got Beast Within and Generous Gift, just catch all answers, as well as Chaos Warp and Boros Charm, again to help us protect our board. The artifacts are pretty straightforward. Got the Soul Ring, and then Mirror Box and Mirror Gallery, so we can eliminate the legend rule. Since we don't have a lot of tutors in this deck, we're just gonna put as many effects as we can into this deck so we have a higher chance of running into it. Then our enchantments, we've got stuff like Glittering Frost, Verdant Haven, Dawn's Reflection, Mana Bloom, extra ramp that can also trigger our enchantresses. Then we've got all of the shrines, like I said before, and a few ways to copy them, like Mirror Maid, Copy Enchantment, Estrid's Invocation, and then stuff like Paradox Haze and Sanctum of All, so we can get extra triggers on our shrines. And if we get a couple of Sanctum of Alls out, things get really crazy from that point on, because if an ability of another shrine you control triggers while you control 6 or more shrines, that ability triggers an additional time. So once we get a few Sanctum of Alls out, we're not only going to be tutoring our deck a bunch for our shrines, we're going to be getting extra triggers of those shrines, and it's just going to get crazy. It also should be noted that Sanctum doesn't care if the shrines that you're counting towards the 6 shrines are tokens or not. So since Go-Shintai creates colorless shrine enchantment creature tokens, that will count towards the Sanctum of All 6 shrine requirement. And if you notice, this deck is a little more expensive than the Skirmish builds that I normally do, and that's because these copy effects and the legend rule canceling effects are all pretty expensive. So if you wanted to cut this deck down in price, you could just throw in some sagas and the deck would still function pretty similarly. I wouldn't worry too much about that. With the lands, things get a little interesting since we are on a more of a budget with the skirmish version. A little bit more basics, but we also have plenty of ramp and color fixing in our enchantments. And also, when you're building 5-color mana bases, you want to look at your overall mana spread. Since we are heavier into green, blue, and white as our primary colors with splashing red and black, we can kind of bank a little bit more on our green, blue, and white sources and not so much on our red and black sources. We still want to be able to pay the cost on Go-Shintai and get that decently consistent. But overall, like the dual lands that I have are focusing on those 3 primary colors, and some of them can tap for the extra colors that we don't necessarily need 100% of the time. For the battle version of Go-Shintai, I decided to do something a little bit more stacks here, and you could do combos like Ghostly Flicker with Dual Caster Mage, or you could even do the Opal Wave combo that I introduced in the Estra deck. But since we've already done that, I want to do something a little different, and we haven't really explored too many stacks decks on this channel yet, so I thought it'd be cool to do that with this version of Go-Shintai. Plus, we can use Go-Shintai's ability to recur the stacks pieces in case they get removed. And if you're looking at the creatures, you notice that we're down to 2 of the monocolor Go-Shintai, and that's because as we move up in power level, you want to start shaving off the stuff that has less impact on the board and your overall game plan, and put stuff in that has more impact on your overall game plan. So we've added an Archon of Emeria and Drain of Magistrate, both fantastic stacks pieces in EDH, and they also help us achieve the hard locks that we have in our deck, which we'll get to a little bit later when we move to the enchantment section. For the sorceries, we added a few more board wipes, Blasphemous Act, we've still got the Vanquish the Horde, fantastic, and a Supreme Verdict, uncounterable board wipe, really good. Wargate, another fantastic tutor, can tutor anything on our deck. It's also pretty cheap. Idyllic Tutor and Eldritch Evolution, so we can tutor. And a Dance of the Manse is still in here, so we can recur some of our stuff in case we lose Go-Shintai. The instants, we've still got a few of the cards, like Beast Within, added a Corrosion Grip, uncounterable removal is fantastic. And we've still got counter spells that we really want to use since we're still a permanent base deck, and even more so since we're a stacks deck. We really want to be able to stop players from removing our board, so they still will be influenced by our stacks pieces. So Dovin's Veto is fantastic. Negate is fantastic in pretty much any power level that you're playing in. Drown of the Lock I think is really nice. It's very flexible in terms of removal. And we've also added a Heroic Intervention and a Teferi's Protection to help protect our board. Teferi's Protection gets a little bit awkward. It's fantastic against stuff like Cyclonic Rift, but if a player is trying to wipe the board and get rid of our stacks pieces and we cast the Teferi's Protection, the stacks are going to be gone for that turn. So they have a slight opening where they're not affected by the stacks pieces, but in terms of enchantment decks, Cyclonic Rift is one of our worst enemies, so Teferi's Protection is a really good answer to that. And the artifacts, just a Sol Ring, nothing too crazy. So with the enchantments is where the fun begins. So we've got a few of our stacks pieces, our Silence, Blind Obedience, stuff like Stony Silence. Since we're only on 1 artifact here, we don't lose out a lot by running Stony Silence. Very powerful card. Then we've got Stranglehold to stop our opponents from tutoring, Rule of Law, so our opponents can't outvalue us very well. Then we've got our lock pieces. So Decree of Silence is whenever an opponent plays a spell, counter that spell, and put a depletion counter on Decree of Silence. If there are 3 more depletion counters on Decree of Silence, sacrifice it. It also has Cycling 6, and when you cycle Decree of Silence, you may counter target spell. Then we also have Solemnity. So Solemnity says players can't get counters, and counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. So if we have the Decree of Silence and an opponent casts a spell, the spell will get countered, and then no counters will be placed on Decree of Silence. So we'll effectively counter all of our opponent's spells for the rest of the game. And then the next lock that we have is with Possibility Storm and either Rule of Law, the Archon of Emeria, or Drain of Magistrate. So Possibility Storm, whenever a player casts a spell from his or her hand, that player exiles it. Then exile cards from the top of his or her library until he or she exiles a card that shares a card type with it. That player may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then he or she puts all cards exiled with Possibility Storm on the bottom of his or her library in random order. So essentially what happens is player casts a spell from their hand, and then Possibility Storm triggers, and you exile the cards until you hit another card. You attempt to cast that spell, but you can't, because Rule of Law and the Archon say that players can only cast one spell a turn. With the Draenith, it becomes a one-sided lock, because Draenith says players can't cast spells anywhere other than their hands. So with the Possibility Storm, they're casting the spell from exile. So it's an action that they cannot perform. So a one-sided lock with the Draenith Magistrate, and it locks everyone out with the one of the Rule of Law effects. And how we're going to play around this is Possibility Storm only triggers when you cast spells from your hand. So we can still cast our commander. Opponents can still cast their commanders too. And with Go-Shintai, we can pay the activation and return an enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So if we have a Go-Shintai of Lost Wisdom, we can mill ourselves and then reanimate the enchantments that we want. Or we can use stuff like Sanctum of Calm Waters and the Honden to draw over our hand size and then discard those cards and then reanimate them with Go-Shintai. Another one of our locks is Solitary Confinement. So this card says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Solitary Confinement unless you discard a card, skip your draw step, and you have Shroud and prevent all damage that would be dealt to you. So basically this card makes you very hard to interact with, and to keep up with our draw, since we skip our draw step and we have to discard a card, we use either Sanctum of Calm Waters or the Honden to draw enough cards to maintain card advantage with the Solitary, or we can actually draw more cards than the requirement for Solitary Confinement and essentially let us keep it up forever. Then if we have Greater Aromancy and a Privileged Position, basically makes everything we control uncounterable. So the only thing that's really going to stop us at this point is if our opponent has a board wipe of some kind, Bane of Progress, Ugin, something like that, and that's why we have the counterspell back up, so we can stop our opponents from doing that. Upgrading the lands was pretty straightforward. I essentially just added in all of the shock lands. If you have the fetch lands, you go ahead and throw those in too. Just figured that the fetch lands are pretty expensive, ranging from anywhere to $20 to $40 per fetch, and the shock lands are anywhere from about $10 to $20. So adding those in, not as hard on the budget as adding in all of the fetches. Again, we're paying attention to our color distribution here, and we're adding and cutting cards accordingly. Again, green and white are our biggest colors, followed by blue, and then black and red are not as important. Again, we still want to be able to hit Wooburg to pay for Go-Shintai's activation cost, but overall, we want to make sure that we're hitting the blue, green, and the white colors. So that's why our the lands that intertap that I did keep in are primarily focused on those colors, and we've got a little bit more in terms of basics for those colors to help support that. And overall, green is our most important color because that will open up the door for all the other colors in the deck: Fertile Ground, Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch, as well as Ignoble Hierarch will help us achieve that. Before I move on to the Glory version, if you like this video and you think what I'm doing here is pretty cool, go ahead and like, subscribe, and leave a comment below letting me know what commander you'd like to see me brew next. The Glory version of Go-Shintai is super spicy, and it's kind of hard to leverage Go-Shintai in general in the context of cEDH, but I've got some pretty sweet ideas here. So our main combo piece is going to be Weaver of Harmony, and it's got pay green, tap it, copy target activated or triggered ability you control from an enchantment source. You may choose new targets for the copy. And what we're going to do is we're going to pair it with either Intruder Alarm or a Jeskai Ascendancy. So Intruder Alarm says creatures don't untap during their controller's untap steps, and whenever a creature comes into play, untap all creatures. Jeskai Ascendancy, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn, untap those creatures, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So we're going to get either Intruder Alarm or Jeskai Ascendancy. We're going to put that trigger on the stack. And with that trigger on the stack, we're going to copy it with Weaver of Harmony. And as long as we have a creature that can produce at least 1 green, we can copy that trigger infinitely, because we will continue to untap our Weaver, and then the original trigger will stay at the very bottom of the stack, and we will continue to copy that trigger. If we have stuff like Sanctum Weaver or Bloom Tinder and enough colors on the board, Incubation Druid with a counter on it, we can just produce infinite mana. And if we have the Intruder Alarm, we have a few ways to use that as a few outlets. So we've got Thrasios, which we can dump all of the mana into, draw our whole deck, and then cast the Thassa's Oracle to win. Zertod Druid, whenever it's tapped for mana, deals 1 damage to each opponent. Go-Shintai can also function as an outlet for the Intruder Alarm. So we have 2 enchantments here. We've got Seal of Fire and Omen of the Forge. So Seal of Fire, sacrifice it, deal 2 damage to target creature or player. So we can recur Seal of Fire infinitely to deal infinite damage to the table. And Omen of the Forge, whenever it enters the battlefield, deal 2 damage to any target, and sacrifice it to Scry 2. And both of these cards function pretty well outside of the combo. There's a lot of stuff in cEDH that you want to be hitting, like Tymna. You've got Opposition Agent, Dothi Voidwalker, all the little stacks creatures that you really want to get rid of. This will hit most of those, outside of like a Drannith Magistrate. And then, again, just a bunch of creatures that can tap for mana to help support the overall game plan. And a couple of creatures. Dockside is just phenomenal in cEDH. Drannith Magistrate as well. Very, very powerful card. And even if we don't have one of the Intruder Alarm or the Jeskai Ascendancy out, Thrasios is just a fantastic way to sink our mana into something. The sorceries are pretty much going to be tutoring for us. We got Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent, Eldritch Evolution, and Neoform. We have a ton of dorks in this deck, and they are all fantastic for finding our combo pieces or a Weaver of Harmony. Savine's Reclamation, fantastic reanimation spell, and also really great for setting up our intuition piles. Toxic Deluge as a way to wipe the board for really cheap, and we're going to keep the Wargate in. Can tutor anything, and we have a lot of things that we want to be tutoring for, so we're definitely going to keep that in. The instance, I've got stuff like a Braid, keeping Dovin's Veto in is fantastic. Other cheap stuff like Chain of Vapor, Flusterstorm, Swan Song, so we can interact with our opponents effectively while trying to set up our own combos. Then we've got the Intuition. So the Intuition, search your library for any 3 cards and reveal them to target opponent. He or she chooses one, put that card into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Shuffle your library afterwards. So this card can tutor for our Weaver of Harmony or the Intruder Alarm, Jeskai Ascendancy, and the Savine's Reclamation. So if our opponent puts the Savine Rec into our hand and the other 2 pieces to our graveyard, we can use Savine Rec to reanimate one of our combo pieces, then just go from there. Or if we're going to go for an Underworld Breach combo, we can get our Underworld Breach and the Lion's Eye Diamond and a Savine's Rec. And if we already have the Brain Freeze in our hand, it makes things really hard for our opponents, because if they put the Underworld Breach into our graveyard, we can use the Savine's Rec to put the Underworld Breach back onto the battlefield. From there, you can cast your Lion's Eye and then start going ham with the Brain Freeze by milling your deck, casting it over and over again until you have enough to where you can either cast your Thassa's Oracle and win that way, or you can just mill out your opponents, depending on the situation and whatever the best option you have at that moment in time. We've also got Banishing Neck, which can serve as another outlet with the Intruder Alarm or the Jeskai Ascendancy. So until end of turn, target creature gains tap, return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So cast this on one of our creatures, and then we can, with the Intruder Alarm, we can keep returning a creature to our hand and casting it again to get more untapped triggers. Or we can return like one of our artifacts or an enchantment with the Jeskai Ascendancy to continue to draw through our deck, and potentially we could just kill people with like Omen of the Forge by returning it to our hand over and over and over again. Silence is fantastic to stop people from interacting with our combo, especially since with Intruder Alarm it untaps all creatures. So if your opponents have creatures that can tap for mana, when you're performing that combo, they can create mana as well and potentially respond to you. So having a Silence or a Grand Abolisher out really helps keeping our combo protected when we're going for it. The artifacts are all pretty straightforward. Just the standard ramp. Trying to keep it more on the color side than the colorless side, since we don't have any crazy costs that we're doing. It's all pretty pip intensive. So stuff like Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, Mox Diamond, Mana Crypt, and Soul Ring are really fantastic ramp pieces, so we're going to keep those in. And of course the Lion's Eye Diamond as a combo piece. The enchantments, we've tuned them down to really the stuff that we really want in the deck. Aura of Silence, again, is a fantastic stacks piece in cEDH. If an opponent is trying to go off with Adnaz and they need a lot of their fast mana to achieve their win, Aura of Silence straight up stops that by making them cost 2 additional more. So it's really hard for your opponent to go mana positive on those rocks. Concordant Crossroads is a great way for us to give all of our creatures haste. So if we're trying to do our Intruder Alarm stuff, it makes it a little bit easier for us to immediately win the turn we resolve one of these cards. Then we've got Rhystic Study and the Mystic Remora, just fantastic ways to draw cards in cEDH. Our 2 outlets, Omen of the Forge and Seal of Harmony, Sterling Grove, so we can tutor for one of our enchantments. Underworld Breach is a combo piece, and these Utopia's for Long Growth are really efficient ramp spells. The lands, pretty much added in all the fetch lands, all of the duels, all of our shock lands. We don't need all of them, and again, we're looking at our overall spread to see which duels we want to prioritize over others. And this is also this mana base is also important because we are on a Tainted Pact mana base. Since we are running that card, we want to make sure that we have no cards that repeat, and it's really easy to do in 5-color. It's a little bit harder to do in the like 2-color decks that you'll sometimes see do it. It's definitely achievable, but in 5-color, it's pretty easy to set up the mana base like that. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Opalwave MTG. As I said before, I had a ton of fun brewing these decks for this episode. I hope this gave you some good ideas for what you're going to do with your version of Go-Shintai, and hopefully a better understanding of how your brew is going to fit within the power spectrum of EDH. And until next time.